Okay, so we're back. And now we're going to talk about the main event, right? I've been talking and talking and talking just to get us to this point, and I appreciate your patience with me, but as you probably learned by now, setting it up is pretty important for me. So, the event. Mentioned it in the last talk. Let's come back to it. Man goes down from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's a perilous journey. He's accosted by robbers. They beat him, they strip him, they take his money, and they leave him for dead. And he's lying by the side of the road. He's out there in public. In verse 31, a priest was going down the road, sees the man, and walks on the other side. And then we're told in verse 32, so likewise a Levite. Now, if I'm there with Jesus listening to this, what I've just heard, and certainly this lawyer would have heard, is some kind of indictment of the of the religious leadership, right? Although religious leadership that is attached specifically to the temple, not religious leadership in general. You have rabbis, you have Pharisees, you have scribes, but religious leadership attached specifically to the temple. The Pharisees were attached more to the and the scribes were attached more differently. The Pharisees were attached more, I say attached. I probably should say associated more with the synagogue system. And there might be a number of synagogues, but there was only one temple. So what I just heard as a hearer, there with Jesus is, these religious leaders did not do something that, I think Jesus thinks that they should have done, right? So if you look back at the Old Testament, the prophets continually chide Israel and Israel's leaders about their lack of attention to the poor, their lack of attention to the afflicted. And then here, this lawyer has asked Jesus this question about inheriting eternal life, and then he tells Jesus, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And so then the question, who is my neighbor? The priest, the Levite, they walk on the other side because they are afraid, apparently, we're not told specifically, but apparently, of violating cleanliness laws, right? So what are the cleanliness laws? Well, one of them is that you can't touch a dead body. They may have thought this man was dead. And if they had touched a dead body, they would have been ritually unclean. They would have had to ritually purify themselves, which takes days. And so not wanting to do that, not wanting to risk it, they walk on the other side. They steer totally clear of this man who is indeed alive. And this makes me think, actually, of the story of the Levite and his concubine in Judges 17 to 19, but that's another matter. We'll just bracket that off for a moment. So in some sense, the religious leaders did what they were supposed to do. They avoided what they thought. I'm supposing, right? I don't know what they thought. I'm supposing that they thought he was dead, and that what they were going to do then is avoid the dead body. Perfectly right religious thing to do. But then there comes along this Samaritan. And if you look in verse 33, there's an interesting little point. The Samaritan looks at the man who had been beaten. He saw him, and he has compassion on him. Now, the fact that the writer notes that about the Samaritan tells us something about his perspective on the priest and the Levite who had passed by earlier. The fact that he doesn't say that about them, that they had compassion, or even, it's even somewhat antiseptic. It doesn't even say that they don't have compassion, but it is clear that the Samaritan does. So sometimes when we deal with other people, when we operate through our lives, the one question is, what have I said? The second question is, what have I not said? So sometimes I don't say things, and that carries as much weight as what I do say. Sometimes when I focus specifically on saying one thing and not saying another, I have actually said two things. And you and I operate all the time like this. Now, we'll have a conversation with someone and we might ask them a follow-up question. Now, you said this. Did you also mean this? You said that you didn't want to go out. Does that mean you also don't want to call in pizza, or you just want to eat something here, right? We ask those kind of regular clarifying questions. And I imagine when you are looking at physician's orders on a patient, you ask those clarifying questions all the time. So that's what's happening here. There's a clarification that's going on. This guy shows compassion. What does it say about the priest and the Levite? The writer doesn't tell us. We're left to figure that out on our own, and that's how literature works. But I think we probably are on pretty safe ground to surmise that they did not show compassion. They were more concerned about something else. Maybe it was ritual purity, maybe it was inconvenience, maybe they were hard-hearted. Jesus doesn't say, and I'm not wanting to suppose that they were acting with bad intent. I think they probably, I think my money would be on they thought he was dead and didn't want to compromise ritual purity. But the Samaritan is not so encumbered by that allegiance to ceremonial law. And he just has compassion. And what's going on here is a kind of reversal. The one that you think, because he is in some ways your enemy, the one you think is going to act with malevolence doesn't. The ones that you think should act with benevolence don't. Jesus is making a point. Who is my neighbor? The Samaritan kind of got it, because he is not concerned about whether this person is his kind of ethnic or cultural enemy. He's concerned about the need that is in front of him. So, I look back to that question that the lawyer asked in verse 29. Who is my neighbor? What he said about neighbor is that you should love your neighbor as yourself. And I want to fill out that question a little bit. Jesus is trying to answer the question behind the question. Who is my neighbor that I should love him? So in verse 36, Jesus comes back to that in a way, because now he's told the story, he's made his point, and he asks the follow-up question back to the lawyer. Which one of these was neighborly? Which one of them showed that kind of hospitality? And I probably should not let this moment go by without saying that hospitality, welcome, care, that's of prime importance in the Middle Eastern custom, even to this day. And those that don't show hospitality are thought in some way to violate the code. So then what we see here is it's not just seeing the afflicted. All three of them saw the afflicted, but seeing the afflicted as neighbor. And also, here's the kind of the key for me: who saw themselves as the neighbor of the afflicted one? Because that's the question that the lawyer has asked. Who is my neighbor? Who do I see as neighbor? So it's not just the compassion part, that's true enough, but who do I see as neighbor, and thus act that way, act neighborly to them?